Welcome, folks, to The Twist. I'm Erika Grey.
And I'm Don Pravda. Welcome.
And today from St. Petersburg, we've got Mike from Earl Grey, and we're going to talk about the sabotage that happened to the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline. And Mike, before we go a little on, I want to say that I know that they're conducting an investigation, but I've kind of conducted my own, and I've come to the conclusion that Biden did it. But that's just my 2 cents. But I would like to hear, we would both like to hear what you have to say about this, because the real concern here is the fact that this does look like something that was done by the United States. And how now will Russia respond?
That's a very good question. Thank you, of course, for having me on your show. I will just bring up Nebenzia's quote from his speech at the United Nations Security Council recently, because I think he summed it up really well. In his last sentence, he said, "Colleagues, I hope all in this chamber realize to what dangerous line the perpetrators of this sabotage are driving us." I thought that's very insightful there from Vasily Nebenzia, the permanent representative of Russia, because that is very true indeed. And even if we take away any presumptions as to who did it, we don't know at this stage exactly who, but whomever was responsible, because nearly all nations that have commented agree that this was not a natural disaster. This was certainly man-made and premeditated. So whoever was behind it seemingly had very nefarious motives in order to do it.
Well, it's either someone who wanted to stoke the conflict between the West and Russia, or it's the United States. And it's my feeling that it's the United States. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline has been protested prior to the war in Ukraine, and both houses, Republican and Democrats, are both against those pipelines. So it's almost a no-brainer to, at this time, commit that act of sabotage, blame it on the Russians, which makes no sense. And so that's the view I'm going in. I'm not sure, Don, what's your opinion on this?
Don't have the proof yet, or the distinct knowledge as to what has happened and by who. So it becomes to be or not to be, to sabotage or not to sabotage, who did it, or was there in fact a mutual act of sabotage or saboteurs? It's a great drama that's unfolding.
I mean, are they going to be able to find out, Mike? Is there a way in?
Well, the Russians claim they have all the necessary evidence to conclude that it was indeed the USA. Quite what those materials are, they haven't yet declared, but the Foreign Intelligence Service made that claim very clearly. I thought Vasily Nebenzia would be presenting it much like he did with the biolabs in Ukraine. I believe they went to the UN and they put their evidence in dossier and presented it for all to see. So clearly they weren't ready, perhaps, at that time to do so. Perhaps they're keeping that card up their sleeve. The thing to note as well, let's move aside from the social media evidence that's been presented, such as Victoria Nuland making a not-so-veiled threat, such as Biden also making his not-so-veiled threat. If we cast our minds back to 2015, the Swedish actually discovered underwater drones. These were packed with explosives that were lying next to the Nord Stream pipeline. They claimed that the detonation or control cords had been cut from these drones, but in the article that I reported on and showed my viewers on my YouTube channel, shared on my Telegram, I didn't report it on YouTube, they never divulged whose drone, whose underwater craft this was. So they kept that to themselves. You've mentioned about an investigation. The Russians are already saying that it's simply a cover-up operation. And given how tightly controlled these waters are by NATO, the threats that were made by Estonia and the surrounding countries there, not threats, sorry, the boasts that how they controlled the waters with missile systems such that no Russian ship could leave St. Petersburg without being detected or even, if necessary, struck. It leaves very little room for the idea that Russia was able to send anything like a submersible or a naval craft out there to commit this, which has lent the media, in my opinion, to posit that this was a far longer premeditated self-act of sabotage. So to the point where they claim that Russia built in these explosives when they laid the pipes.
What I find here in the United States is almost this view, just among lay people, that the United States could not possibly do something like this. And I think the United States very well could do something like this, because I remember hearing, the bill that Ted Cruz wanted to pass against Nord Stream 2. And this was prior to anything, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So there was so much protest against Nord Stream 1 and 2 by the United States. It's almost, I know I'm saying this without an investigation, but I think it's a no-brainer that Biden did this. And, it's almost like a third grader could almost figure this out. It's that simple. And yet, but you're right, the evidence isn't there, but I think it is. And I think what's also tragic is when I listen to Nebensky, speaking, and then you listen to the American counterpart, it was so anti-Russia. Everything that Russia is stating is propaganda. And that narrative is just unbelievable. But on this show, there's two sides to a story. We know the Russian side to the story. And so I declare I'm Russia friendly, and I'm not ashamed and I'm not afraid to say that this show is Russia friendly, because Russia's narrative needs to be listened to. And if you look at the actions, there's actually a verse in the Bible that talks about by their actions you'll know them. And if you look at the actions on the part of Ukraine right now and on the part of the West, the United States, why are none of these nations coming to the table with Russia? Why is that completely out of the question for anything that Russia has asked for? And I didn't think that Russia's demands on the onset of this were unreasonable. Ukraine is in its backyard. And why are we continuously pointing missiles at Russia when there was no threat? And what's interesting too about Biden is you've got Biden saying now that, see, this is why we told you that Nord Stream 1 and 2 was so dangerous, because, it gives Russia all this control, and now Russia has damaged this. So I think this turned out to be a very nice scheme for the United States. They're killing several birds with one stone by this act of sabotage, and also get to blame it on the Russians and make Russia look even worse than they're making Russia look.
You're absolutely right. I'm actually going to backtrack you a little bit there. What made you quote that particular line of the Bible?
It's one of my favorites, because
Is it really? I find that eerie.
One of my favorites in the sense of, when you're dealing with people will tell you anything. And there's a lot of truth in that. And I find that in my personal life, but also when you see it even in politics. For instance, this talk of democracy, I think democracy is becoming a real smokescreen as to, but if you look at what they're doing, you're not seeing the democracy. It's maybe, like for instance, in Europe, it's not in its institutional structure, it's undemocratic. And it seems that this is more about control, and we're going to fight this to the death. And it's about product and acquiring the nation. This is more about economy, in my opinion, at the end of the day.
I asked you that question for a very important reason. I'm afraid I very much doubt that you caught Vladimir Putin's speech on Friday, I believe it was. Did you hear that?
Was that his speech against the West?
It was part of. Yeah, he quoted Jesus, and he said, by the fruits of their actions ye shall know them.
You have to be kidding me.
I'm not. I've got the clip.
What do you think of that, Don? What do you think of that? By the way,
said
Don,
that. Yeah.
Don is from he hails from the Jewish community in New York City. So we have What do you think of that,
I
Don?
think I
Is
think
that amazing or what?
politicians have a knack for manipulating quotes. I found it kind of interesting that he's becoming a more devout Christian in these times and denouncing the West. But I'm just wondering what's going on in his head. That's actually one of the great questions in America. What is he thinking? That's what people want to know. And he is a mysterious leader. And yet, let's be honest, he has been a bold leader, and in the sense that, as Erika said, I do represent the Jewish community. He has protected the Jewish community and the dignity of the Christian community and its churches and synagogues for a long time. But we're seeing a very ruthless man, and we're trying to understand this country and this leader and his Politburo, and wondering what is the future? How long is this war going to go on? And what is the real story with the pipeline? And that's going to be solved, I think, over the next few weeks, perhaps a month at latest. And we welcome your powers of observance, sir.
Well, on that note, I agree with you absolutely that certain quotes are often spun and used for their psychological effect on the target audience. And that, I agree, in this case, is what was intended. Putin has been quite overt in the use of Christian references. Now, this particular quote followed his absolute tirade against the depravity of Western society, in which he was illustrating, do we want to have a society of parent one, parent two, of gender reaffirming, affirming, stuff like this? And that's where he then finished on that segment, on that quote, saying that, the West were holding themselves up to be all this, leaders of democracy and all this, when actually you can judge them by the fruits of their actions, and it's nothing that Russia wants to be any part of whatsoever. Now, why did he choose the Christian quote there, quoting Jesus? Is because of the conservative almost revival that we're seeing, not just in Russia. I mean, the people who subscribe to those traditional values and those conservative viewpoints, those who we've seen it in Italy with Giorgia Meloni. She's talked about God, she's talked about the family, she's talked about identity, all the things that she claims are under attack in the EU. And this is consistent with Putin's own criticisms of the West. If we sort of segue back to the pipeline, sorry again for going on that tangent, I just found that very eerie, Erika, of all the quotes that you picked, that happened
really,
to be.
yes, that is very eerie. Sorry for cutting you off, but I
No,
did
it's
listen
okay.
to that. Actually, Don and I both listened to that, and I have to say that I really admire Putin for that. I admire him for taking that stand. And if anybody out there is listening, doesn't like my saying that, he's standing on Christian values. He's standing on biblical values. I'm going to take a stand on that too. And I'm going to stand along somebody that's going to take a stand on that. But having said that, there is a contradiction to some people of his, espousing the Christian values. And then, of course, this horrific war with the images and the continuation. So just your opinion on that, and not so much for myself, because I then look at the United States, which is a Christian nation, and we've been responsible for more wars. And I also understand that this is very geostrategic on the part of Russia. There was almost no, war is unfortunate, but it happens when nations can't come to a resolution. So I'm not as critical on that aspect, but some Americans are. So if you would want to speak to that, or some Christians are, or maybe some Jews are, if you would want to speak to that piece. And again, my opinion, but I'm interested to hear, what you have to say.
Well, to tie into that, the overwhelming feedback I got on my live stream when I was broadcasting Putin's speech was the jealousy that Americans had for a leader who quoted Jesus. Why isn't Biden quoting? Why isn't Biden using the Bible to guide his actions? Where is this extension of the olive branch? Where is the love thy neighbor? It's anything but, from what I'm told, in America today. This idea of loving your neighbor, it seems to have been lost. It's all, I'll divide you on this identity, this brand, this subdivision of society. It's not, it's very fragmented feeling. Whereas conversely, rightly or wrongly, Russian society is, it's not completely, but it's very much united. So we have sort of polar opposite of the spectrums here. And Putin himself said that there are those in the West who support our cause, and we're very grateful for them. And I think some of these Christian conservative values are part of the reason for that.
I actually interviewed a Christian from Russia, and he was talking about how great it was to live in Russia. He's originally an American. He's now living in Russia. And it was a great show. It was very eye-opening from the Russian perspective, Nazis from the Russian perspective. And he also was saying that the sanctions are hurting the Christian missions in Russia right now. That's the money that can't get through.
Oh, of course. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I was wondering how. And of course, yeah, the transfer of money. That is, yeah, really unfortunate. A name I'll just quickly leave with you and your audience. There is a Russian Orthodox priest from America called Father Joseph Gleason. He has a Substack called movingtorussia.substack.com, and he's putting out really excellent articles for free on Substack. Obviously, there's some paid content given the model, but originally from America, disappointed, disillusioned by what he believed, in his point of view, as the degradation of society, the attack on the family, and since moved to Russia, where he's a practicing Russian Orthodox priest.
Wow. Well, also, I want to bring up, since we're talking about Putin and Biden, Biden just came out and stated now that we would go to war over Taiwan. So with all this talk about, Russia and all this focus on Russia and the war in Ukraine, well, what about America? Are they not looking at the wars that America has started, or the fact that now Biden comes out and states that we would fight for Taiwan? And by the way, you want to talk about all this money going for Ukraine? Right now, American cities are becoming so dangerous that I think, Don, you probably face just as much danger in New York as some people in a war zone now, because it's getting so bad. And the shootings throughout the United States, what's happening is the mentally ill are running rampant. These severely mentally ill, because there's no money to effectively treat them, institutionalize them, provide them housing. They're running the streets and they're committing horrific acts. And what's really upsetting, I think, to some Americans is how much money is going for wars and is not going to improve the United States. I don't think you have that problem in Russia.
No, not at all. I'd describe what you've just told me as godlessness. This is what I hear from America. Absolute, utter godlessness. Putin called it outright Satanism. He went that far.
Yes, I like that. I actually liked when he did that. I was blown away when Putin said,
I was taken aback a bit.
You were taken aback too?
Yeah, I was like, wow, he's really going for it. It was an historic speech. It really was. I think one of the greatest speeches of our time. You don't have to like the man. You don't have to, judge him as you wish or see fit, but the truth in his words, in certain aspects and regards, was just undeniable. It was clear as day. Then you follow that up with Biden's stuttering, where he was then sort of, we're going to send 13 more billion to Ukraine. Well, I looked at those figures, Biden, and 4.5 of them is just to pay salaries of the Ukrainian government. So that's going in 10% for the big guy. That's going to feed the corruption that's led us partly to this situation today. It's going to go to arms manufacturers, these people, from a supposedly God-fearing country, thou shalt not kill, yet profits so greatly and handsomely from death and destruction and all this. The hypocrisy across the board, that's just one tiny little drop in an ocean of hypocrisy. And you can level those same accusations back at Russia, of hypocrisy, I mean. But when it comes to, as you say, condemning someone else, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Even the Bible, Jesus warns about, judging others. And we see them just godlessness.
Well, not
all
only
across the
that, and
board.
then I mean, I'm an eschatologist. That's my core. That's my start. And there's the predictions of nation rising against nation, and this level of depravity in society as we're seeing this, and exactly what you're talking about. But so you cannot help but pay attention to what Putin stated during that speech. It's a breath of fresh air to
Hmm.
hear that coming from a leader when you're right. There's so much immorality, lawlessness, depravity, so much that's being accepted in the name of democracy and in the name of it's just mind-boggling and mean.
Can I challenge both of you to quote one other leader other than Putin who has recently cited the Bible or Jesus or anything like that?
We used to have Jimmy Carter doing that,
Ah,
who was a one-term president, but religion is being used in politics more and more. And I'd have to say, in that sense, President Trump relied heavily on his vice president, Mike Pence, who was connected to the Christian evangelical community. And a large block of votes has gone to Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence due to their belief system.
That's a good point, Don. That's a really good point. I forgot about that, Mike. Trump.
I'd like to follow up with Don's point there as well, because Mr. Trump, former President Trump, on his Truth Social, I'm told, made the point that no one is extending the olive branch, and former President Trump offered to head up the team to broker a peace deal. Why is that coming from Trump? Why not Biden?
Well, actually, Don, you've met Biden a half a dozen
I
times.
have. I've met him a few dozen times.
What's your
I
impression?
have worked in Capitol Hill. Mr. Biden's strongest suit is that he does know how to relate to people. He understands people. He gives his concentration to average folks at the time on the Hill who had questions. And of course, he has plenty to say about the bills that he is sponsoring and what he believes and what he does not believe in. I would like to ask Mr. Mike a few questions, if I may.
Yeah, go
How's
ahead.
that? Okay, now we have a mysterious fellow in the background named Father Kirill. And of course, we're Americans. Father Kirill is back in Russia. He is head of the Orthodox Church. President Putin surely leans on this man as a source of strength and inspiration. Your views on Father Kirill, and then part two. We have seen, Mike, that there is a draft that's happening in Russia. Many of the Russians, the young Russians, are simply leaving the country and going to places like Georgia and Albania. I'm trying to understand what is the enthusiasm of the soldiers in Russia. And part two is, do you expect that this will continue, that draftees will be fleeing the country into places like Finland, Georgia, Albania, perhaps Armenia, as we're hearing? What are your thoughts, sir?
Okay, so I got to cast my mind back to
Yeah.
Patriarch Kirill, was your first part of the question. I have to be frank and honest. I describe myself religiously as agnostic. That's partly due to having traveled the world at quite an early age. So I've been exposed to the teachings of numerous religions ranging from Buddhism, Hindu. I was raised as Church of England. So I've always had that. But I would say I'm agnostic as a sort of way for me to draw upon the wisdom of many of the world's teachings and religions. I believe they all have a lot of wisdom to share, and I prefer not to exclude myself by subscribing to any one particular bit. That's for now, but I do find myself quoting the Bible or mentioning God quite a lot, partly because my audience can easily understand the point I'm trying to make. When it comes to Patriarch Kirill and Russian Orthodox Church, Still actually quite a mystery to me. From my research on Vladimir Putin and his relationship with Patriarch Kirill, I'm not sure how much sway or influence Patriarch Kirill has outside of consulting on religious matters. I'm sure there are some other dealings, as there often is between heads of state and heads of religion. There are other arrangements and so forth. But politically speaking, I suspect that given the strength of the conservative views we've already discussed, I believe that's where Patriarch Kirill may come in. But that's I would ask you just to take that more as a layman's, even an outsider's perspective, given my background and the fact that I'm an expat here in Russia. To move over to part two, you talked about the draft, the part mobilization or partial mobilization, it's been termed for now. This is the state troops. These are supposed to be people with relevant skills and have recently left the army, so they shouldn't take that long to train, in theory. I believe it's Sergei Shoigu has said it'll be about a month. In truth, it'll probably be more like 2 weeks. And they've seemingly been successful in doing so. You're right that there has been a number, I'm going to say in the tens of thousands, it would definitely be thousands, that have left the country. I know a dual citizen friend of mine who has indeed done that as well. The truth is, as has been stated by official sources, those people leaving are not people Russia wants in to serve anyway. They can't leave to Finland because Finland closed the border to Russian. There's no tourism. Russians are not allowed in Finland anymore. This is following the Baltic states who banned Schengen visas to Russians. So that's all blocked off as well. Finland got upset with being a transit state for Russians, so they said, and they believed that these potential draftees were a security threat, they claimed. So actually there's very few routes for Russians to leave from. Georgia and Armenia, I think, was another one. Kazakhstan being another popular one as well. These had FSB and military enlistment posts on the border, so that the advice was, if you don't want to be drafted, stay at home, because it's highly unlikely you'll receive your summons. However, if you run to the border, it's 100% guaranteed that you will get your summons, because they will, of course, check the database and run through. The misconception in the Western media is that if you receive a summons, that's it. You are drafted, you are mobilized, and off you go. That's not actually the case. It was a voluntary time period for you to go to the enlistment office to update the records. Russia still, it's advanced in like banking ways, but in other ways it's still very paper and bureaucratic. In one region, Magadan, for instance, they found that the database system was almost destroyed after years of neglect and no need, so they've had to rebuild that. In those inefficiencies, they've mobilized the wrong people. 59-year-old pensioner with type 2 diabetes, a schizophrenic, all sorts of people wholly unsuited and unsuitable for it, which has been recognized. And no doubt the West has read that Putin has admitted this, which I found very surprising. I would expect these stories to be suppressed, including attacks against military enlistment officers, arson attacks, even a shooting of a commissar. I thought, I didn't expect to see in the news, because surely that might make people nervous about going down to the offices or anything. But no, Russia's been surprisingly open about all of these issues and stories. The West has, of course, spun it. At this point in time, the people that have left are viewed as traitors. They're not welcome here, and I agree. I subscribe to that. I'm fully prepared and willing, if Russia calls upon me, to do my part. But I think that's the old soldier in me, because having been ex-infantry, I'm used to doing what I'm told and defending my not like homeland in the sense of home of my birth, but this is where I live. This is where my home is, and yes, I see it's under threat from NATO and even English-speaking soldiers. We see videos of this.
One final question. The European Union just issued more sanctions, and I think on 1,300 Russians. And it seems that these sanctions now are even more crushing. So, what is your commentary on the recent sanctions just issued by the European Union in regards to what they call the sham referendum?
Yeah. From what I'm aware, I don't know all of the individual sanctions because many of the media just sort of bundled it up together. I know that one of
Stopping
them,
all Russian, I believe the Russian imports into Europe are now not just, now it's all other products, many other products was
yeah, I even
part of
read
this.
about toilet paper, deodorant, all the things that Germany would likely to need. Yeah, which I'm not saying that Germany only got Russian toiletries, for instance. So I'm not saying they're going to go without it. I just found that quite laughable, given they were told not to take showers and only use a flannel for certain parts of the body. I thought, well, you might want some extra cheap deodorant from Russia. So I thought that was a bit self-defeating. Also self-defeating is the proposed oil price cap. They've been toying with this idea before, but Biden put this forward as his strong response, which I find ridiculous. We've seen how that's worked with the idea of a gas price cap. It's just unworkable and detrimental. It completely backfires when they try to manipulate the market, because that's essentially what they're doing with it. What I found, I was surprised that there were any more sanctions because I thought they were sanctioned out. I thought they'd exhausted everything after 8 rounds, I think, now that the EU's gone into. What I found surprising and somewhat amusing was they've started to target individuals. I've got here in front of me an article from CNN, and I'll quote it just quickly. US officials grudgingly acknowledge that Elvira Nabiullina has done an effective job managing Russia through this initial phase of sanctions, just as she did in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea. This is Russia's central banker. So the US is targeting her, and if you're to believe CNN, for the crime of being good at her job. It goes on to say Nabiullina has deftly raised interest rates, imposed capital controls, and sought holes and workarounds to float an economy under siege. A good central banker can do things to buoy the currency. They have a very good central banker. We knew that then. We know it now. Well, I found that all pretty petty, in all truth. I'm not sure I understand what this really achieves, because Elvira Nabiullina was unlikely. I don't know. She might have had dealings with the US. She might have had dealings with the EU. We really don't know. But it's also her deputies and so on. But they see Nabiullina now as one of, quote, Putin's top lieutenants. Well, I understand why they're now bestowing on her this title, given her outstanding performance in rescuing the ruble from becoming Biden's rubble. But really, in all truth, the sanctions package are laughable. They're at best detrimental to the West, as all the others have been. They are ineffectual in the stated aim of bringing down Russia. I really don't understand how toiletries fund Russia's war machine, as was one of the justifications that this was to damage Russia's war machine. When a war machine ran on toilet paper, I don't know. And that's an aside. Again, I find it futile, and I'm led to the conclusion that this is sabotage of the EU, orchestrated by the US, which is consistent with what we've seen with Nord Stream. This puts Germany in... Actually, I wouldn't be understating it when I said a fatal position, because I fear for some poor souls this winter, it will prove to be a fatal situation for them.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely been shoot themselves in the foot sanctions. I mean, the sanctions, basically, they've just sunk the entire world practically into a recession. You've got inflation now that's globally, currencies are tanking. You have the United States increasing rates almost, I mean, they're so in an opposite direction of where they were. You have to wonder if they're now not panicking. I mean, I'm almost expecting a run on the dollar possibly happening.
The pound sterling was crashing just the other day, so it's not just the dollar.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Euro.
the sterling, the euro. I mean, but it all started with the shoot themselves in the foot sanctions. And what's so shocking is they're still going at it. In other words, They are determined. And then you've got Zelensky on the world stage expecting, Israel and everybody to just be there for him. But that's a topic actually of another show.
Yeah.
We can talk about Zelensky.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Okay, well then we have a rain date. That's the next topic is Zelensky.
Right.
I mean, I hear just this entitlement, this that he has on the world stage, and then things that he's doing within Ukraine that are also dubious, and yet he's exonerated and he's viewed as like this hero.
Yep, absolutely. With his Vogue magazine shoots, I think actually wasn't he featured in Jerusalem magazine, most influential Jew of the year, or something like that. I've got a
Is he in
screen
the
grab I
Jerusalem
could show.
Post?
Well-
Is he actually? I did see that, but I didn't look to see who was named. He was actually named by the Jerusalem Post.
Yeah, he had a silhouette on the front cover, and he was named, I think, as one of the top 50 most influential Jews.
Really? We were just at the conference in New York.
I'll send you a screenshot over. It may have been Russian misinformation that I was given. So
He's the leader of his country and he is Jewish. That makes him influential.
sure.
But, it's also interesting. I think in Israel, what's the policy in Israel? Some of it's mixed. I mean, it seems
Yes.
mixed. Those who understand what Putin has done for the Jewish community. And also there's a pending agreement with the Eurasian Union right now with that Israel has with Russia. It's a pending agreement, trade agreement. So I can understand Israel not wanting to completely toe the West line, but it seems in certain areas. But again, that's probably a topic again for another
is.
show. And we're actually going to be running out of time, Mike, in 2 minutes. So to conclude, in my opinion, Biden did it. It's going to be the title of this show.
We'll see.
I think it's almost a no-brainer. And then what we'll be waiting to see is when Russia concludes its investigation and, probably finds 100% that it was the United States. What's Russia going to do next?
Well, I'll say that
we're
Biden
not
hasn't denied it yet. He hasn't
we're
said
not-
that the US wasn't culpable.
And we're not poking the Russian bear anymore. We're sticking a spear through the Russian bear. So it's concerning. It's concerning, what is Russia going to do next? And, as this really ups the ante.
It does. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, and it was so great having you.
Thank you, sir.
And Mike, we will
Thank you
have
for your insights.
Yes, and hopefully my usual broadcasting will work next time, and we will have you again for those other topics. Meanwhile, God bless there in St. Petersburg and in Russia.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.